You are 16. The incense burns heavy in the air, a sweetness masking rot. Golden mosaics shimmer above you, reflecting the 1,000 eyes of men who whisper your name. They say you are blessed, chosen, favoured by the Emperor himself. But tonight, as silk hands pull you toward the candlelit chamber, you understand. Blessings in Byzantium are often curses wrapped in gold, because in this empire, power is bought not with armies, but with your body. The arena was never quiet. Even before dawn, the air trembled with the roars of men and the scrape of beasts behind iron gates. The scent of oil lamps mixed with dust and sweat, a perfume of empire and cruelty. You were only 9, too young to understand why your mother painted her lips before the morning light, too young to know why the guard's eyes lingered longer than words allowed. You only knew the sound of the crowd, that rolling thunder that could crown a man or crush him in a heartbeat. They called it entertainment. To you, it was survival. Your father had once been a trainer in the hippodrome, breaking horses for the racing factions, the blues and the greens, until his back broke before the beasts did. One night, a nobleman dropped a gold coin at your mother's feet. "The girl has her eyes," he said. That single sentence sealed your fate. You remember the first costume. Thin, glittering fabric that hid nothing. Smile, never break eye contact. You're not a child, you're a vision. And in that moment, under the roar of the arena, something inside you broke, softly, silently, like silk tearing. When you turned 12, your mother fell ill. The healers came and went, taking coins and leaving prayers. Her voice faded into whispers, her eyes glassed with fever. The night she died, the arena was still roaring. You could hear the chants echo through the window. The same sound that had fed you now mocked you. The overseer came the next morning. "She owes the house," he said, "and you will pay the debt." You nodded, too numb to cry. They took her body away before the lamps burned out. After that, something inside you changed. You stopped dreaming of saints. You stopped fearing the crowd. You learned that beauty could be a cage, or a key. When you danced now, you no longer trembled. You moved like prophecy, like flame. The crowd began to chant your name, though they didn't know it. To them, you were just the girl with the lion's eyes. One evening, after a performance drenched in applause, a messenger arrived, bearing a parchment sealed with imperial wax. The dancers whispered. The overseer bowed. The emperor had summoned you, not to the arena, but to the palace itself. You stood in silence as the torches flickered. For the first time, you felt the weight of destiny settle on your shoulders, not as a gift, but as a chain of gold. As you stepped into the chariot that would carry you to the palace, the wind from the hippodrome brushed against your face. The sand, the blood, the laughter. All of it behind you now. But in your heart, you knew. The arena never really lets its children go. The palace gates loomed like the mouth of a beast. Golden teeth, marble tongue, and guards with eyes that did not blink. You had imagined it so many times from afar, the shining fortress where destiny was born. But standing here, you realized it wasn't built for people like you. It was built to devour them. The eunuch said nothing as they led you through corridors lined with mosaics of saints and angels. Their faces glowed in the torchlight, judging, silent. You tried to keep your steps graceful, your face unreadable, but your heart beat like a drum. The women who met you inside the perfumed halls wore veils of silk and smiles of glass. They belonged to the emperor's private court, the Vestal Shadows, as people called them. They studied you with the precision of butchers inspecting a lamb. The women who met you inside the perfumed halls wore veils of silk and smiles of glass. They belonged to the emperor's private court, the Vestal Shadows, as people called them. They studied you with the precision of butchers inspecting a lamb. You were washed in rose water, dressed in linen that shimmered with gold thread, and taught how to bow, not too low, not too proud. Every motion rehearsed, every word forbidden. That night they brought you to a chamber lit by 100 candles. A harp played somewhere beyond the curtains, slow and aching, and there, on a throne carved from ivory, sat the emperor. He was not what you imagined. Older, his face carved with the weight of command, his gaze sharp as a blade and twice as cold. He didn't speak at first. He only studied you, as if measuring the price of your soul. The air trembled. You wanted to reply, but words fled. So you did what you were trained to do. You bowed, you smiled, and you pretended not to feel afraid. That was the night the rumour became real, and the fantasy began to feed itself. In the days that followed, the palace became your labyrinth. Every corridor had a watcher, every whisper a price. You learned the unspoken commandments of survival, rules no one dared to write, but everyone obeyed. Rule 1. Never look the emperor in the eye unless he commands it. Rule 2. Never refuse an order, but never appear eager to please. Desire, here, was a performance, not a feeling. Rule 3. Remember that silence is power. What you do not say becomes your greatest weapon. The emperor's harem was not the world of silk and honey whispered about by commoners. It was a gilded prison, built on fear and beauty. Each woman was a rival, each glance a test. He began to summon you often, not always for pleasure, sometimes for conversation. He would ask about your past, your thoughts, even your dreams. One evening he asked, "Do you fear me?" You paused. "Should I?" He smiled, faintly. "Only the wise do." That night, as he dismissed you, he placed a ring in your palm, a token of favour. The other women noticed. The whispers began again, sharper this time. The dancer from the arena was becoming something else, something dangerous. You started to understand the machinery behind the candles and silk. Desire in Byzantium was a tool of statecraft. Bodies were offerings, pleasure was politics, and you, once a child of the arena, were learning to speak its language better than anyone. Weeks turned into months. The emperor's court began to shift around you. Ministers bowed lower, courtiers watched longer. You were still young, too young, but already the palace had carved its mark into your soul. At night you stood before the mirror they gave you, a gift of polished silver. You stared at the reflection and searched for the girl who once danced barefoot in the dust. She was gone. In her place stood someone else, elegant, unreadable, hollow-eyed but unbroken. The emperor began to trust you with secrets. He spoke of wars, conspiracies, betrayals. He told you of generals plotting in shadows, of senators who sold their loyalty for coins. You listened and remembered everything. You realized that knowledge, not beauty, was the truest form of power. One evening, as the city burned with festival fires outside, he took your hand. "You will outlive them all," he said. You smiled, but deep inside a voice whispered, "I already have." When you returned to your chambers that night, the candles flickered low, their wax melting like tears. You looked out toward the distant arena, the place where your life had begun. You understood now that the palace was only a grander version of it. Same audience, same cruelty, only the costumes had changed. But this time, you vowed, you would not just dance for survival. You would dance for power. The bells of Hagia Sophia rang like thunder over Constantinople. Incense curled through the air as thousands gathered beneath the golden dome, a sea of eyes fixed upon you. You stood beside the emperor, draped in robes that shimmered like liquid fire. The patriarch's voice echoed through the hall, "By divine will, she shall reign as Augusta." And as the crown, heavy, jeweled, blinding, was lowered onto your head, you felt it not as a blessing, but as a collar. The crowd roared, trumpets blazed, gold coins rained from the balconies, but behind the music, you heard something else. The slow closing of an invisible door. That night, as you walked through the imperial chambers, marble floors glowing under torchlight, you noticed how every shadow watched you back. Servants moved like ghosts, guards followed at a careful distance, every whisper stopped when you entered a room. You had become untouchable and utterly alone. Your mornings began with ritual, silk veils, holy oils, prayers before dawn. The patriarch himself visited often, reminding you that a woman's virtue was now the empire's mirror. You smiled, you nodded, you played the saint, but behind closed doors you ruled like a sinner. You learned to listen to the spies who thought they spied on you. You rewarded silence more than loyalty. You built a network not of soldiers, but of secrets. When the emperor held council, you sat beside him, silent, adorned, ignored. Yet every word spoken in that chamber passed through your mind like a blade through silk. You learned who lied, who feared, who dreamed too loudly. The people loved you. They called you the Holy Empress, the redeemed Rose. They said you prayed for the poor, that you freed the slaves, that you wept for the lost. Let them believe it. Faith was the softest weapon. But there were moments, quiet and cruel, when the mask suffocated. You would stand before the mirror and whisper to your reflection, "Do you remember the arena? Do you remember who you were?" The woman in the mirror said nothing, only smiled that perfect imperial smile. And you realized with dread the child you once were was gone. All that remained was the saint they made, and the sinner you chose to be. The palace glittered brighter than ever, but beneath the marble rot spread like ivy. The emperor's health declined. Ministers schemed. Foreign ambassadors whispered about succession. And in the middle of it all, you, the empress, the former dancer, the scandal-turned symbol. They feared your past, and yet they needed your grace. You were both their shame and their salvation. Every morning brought another rumour, that you poisoned rivals, that you bewitched the emperor, that you prayed to demons beneath the altar. You didn't bother to deny them anymore. In Byzantium, lies were more powerful than truth. But at night, when the candles burned low and the city slept, you would walk alone through the empty halls. You'd hear the echo of your footsteps and think of the arena's roar. The silence now felt heavier than any applause. One night, as you passed the emperor's chamber, you saw him asleep, frail, fading. The man who once ruled the world, now ruled by breath and memory. You knelt beside his bed and whispered, "You made me empress, but you never freed me." He did not stir. Perhaps he heard, perhaps not. When dawn came, the palace stirred with gossip again. New plots, new prayers, new performances. You put on your crown and your smile and faced the empire once more. Because in Byzantium, a woman could not afford to break, only to harden. The mask had become your face, and soon even you would forget where one ended and the other began. The city trembled with the sound of marching boots. Beyond the palace walls, the empire was bleeding. Persians in the east, Goths in the west, and plague in the streets. But inside the golden halls of Constantinople, the greater war was invisible. A war of faith, flesh, and fear. The emperor's armies fought enemies you could name. Yours were cloaked in robes of white and voices of God. The patriarch had begun to speak of you in sermons, never by name, but always by sin. Even the holiest throne, he warned, can be defiled by the touch of a fallen woman. The courtiers heard, the ministers whispered. Her beauty was her weapon, they murmured. Her soul still carries the dust of the arena. At first you ignored them, but the murmurs grew louder, poisoning the air like incense turned rancid. One night, during Vespers, you stood beside the emperor as the choir sang. You felt the patriarch's eyes pierce through the smoke, through your veil, through your skin, as if God himself were judging you through him. You met his gaze and did not look away. When the service ended, you approached him. "Tell me, Father," you said softly, "does your God forgive women who rise, or only those who kneel?" He said nothing, but you saw fear flicker in his eyes. That was when you understood. The church did not hate your past. It feared your survival. The next months were a fever. The emperor's body grew weaker and your power stronger. Ministers came to you for favours, soldiers for mercy, nobles for permission. And the more they needed you, the more they cursed your name. They called you witch, temptress, serpent. You let them, because in Byzantium, fear lasts longer than love. You began to turn their slander into armour. If they saw you as devil, then you would rule like one. At your command, the palace baths, once places of gossip, became your council halls. Draped in silk and steam, you received envoys while the scent of jasmine masked the tension. Men who would not kneel in the throne room bent their heads here, their pride softened by heat and your gaze. You learned to control the rhythm of their shame, to offer grace, then guilt, to make salvation and damnation indistinguishable. Meanwhile, the patriarch's sermons grew bolder. He accused the court of moral decay, of a Jezebel's curse. You smiled and donated gold to the church. Publicly, you prayed at dawn. Privately, You built an empire of spies within the clergy. Soon you knew every priest's sin, every monk's secret indulgence. The next time the patriarch spoke against you, you sent him a gift, a golden chalice engraved with words only he would understand. He who drinks from this cup must remember who poured it. He never spoke your name again, but victory carries its own poison. At night, when the chants of the city faded and the torches dimmed, the ghosts returned. Not of enemies, but of yourself. You began to dream of the arena again, the crowd roaring, the sand beneath your feet, the little girl who smiled for coins. She would look up at you, blood on her hands, and whisper, "You're still dancing." You'd wake in silence, drenched in sweat, the crown cold against your brow. The emperor, frail and fading, leaned more on you each day. He called you my saint, but even in his affection you sensed suspicion, a subtle tightening of his hand, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. You had become too powerful, too necessary, too dangerous. And so you played both roles, the holy wife and the whispered legend. By day you distributed bread to the starving, by night you commanded the city's spies, manipulating the tides of power like a puppeteer cloaked in gold. You no longer feared the patriarch's sermons or the noble's slander. You had turned your shame into something divine, a myth, a weapon, a shield. But with every triumph, the distance between your soul and your crown grew wider. One evening, as the bells tolled over the harbour, you walked alone to the palace terrace. Below you, the city burned with candlelight, thousands of tiny fires, each a prayer or a secret. You whispered into the wind, "Let them call me what they will. Devil, Empress, witch." Your voice trembled, not with fear but exhaustion. Only I know what it cost to survive. The sea answered with silence, endless and indifferent. And as you turned back toward the palace, toward the murmurs, the masks, and the dying emperor, you felt the war inside you settle into something colder than victory. You had won. But the girl in the arena was gone forever. Years passed like smoke through marble halls. The empire's banners still waved, but their gold had dulled. You ruled beside ghosts now. The emperor long buried, the ministers reshaped by your will, and the city whispering your name like a half-remembered prayer. You had outlived your lovers, your enemies, your legends. Even the patriarch who once damned you was dust. And yet, when you stood before the mirror in your chamber, the same mirror once polished for an emperor's gaze, you saw not an empress. You saw a girl. The girl who had danced barefoot in the dust of the circus, who had learned to smile through pain, who had dreamed not of thrones, but of escape. A reflection lingered behind the jewels and silks, watching you with quiet accusation. What did you trade to become her? The girl seemed to ask. You had no answer. Outside your window, the city roared in prayer and rebellion. The palace was heavy with incense and lies. Courtiers still bowed, but only because they had forgotten how to stand. You moved through the corridors like a living relic, the last memory of a time no one dared to name. Your title had become your cage, your power a monument built over a grave, and in that mirror, for the first time in years, you removed your crown. It felt lighter than it once did, perhaps because it no longer meant victory, it only meant survival. History had begun to rewrite itself while you were still alive. The scribes spoke of your mercy. The church sang of your repentance. The empire told the story of how a courtesan became a saint. You smiled at their lies, for they were kinder than the truth. They said you saved Constantinople during the plague. They forgot you did it by burning the infected quarters. They said you brought peace between the church and the throne. They forgot how many bishops you had destroyed to achieve it. They said the emperor loved you beyond reason. They forgot how often he had feared you. In your private chamber you kept the letters no one else had seen, sealed with the wax of forbidden hands, written in words that could never be spoken aloud. They were your real history, the confessions of men who had bowed to you, begged you, threatened you, and broken under your silence. You never burned them. You could not, because those letters were your last weapon, and you knew that even in death, a woman in Byzantium needed one. Each night, you placed your hand upon the chest of your gown, over the hidden pocket where one letter always rested. It was written not by a lover or a foe, but by you, years ago, in trembling ink. If they ever call me pure, let this be my proof that I was not. I was only human, and that was my sin. You sealed it with no name, no date. You wanted the future to wonder who had dared to write such a thing, because mystery was the last crown you could still wear. The final winter came quietly. The city below your balcony was veiled in ash-coloured fog. Bells tolled for someone, perhaps you, perhaps another, and no one in the streets looked up. You had grown frail, though no one dared say it. Your hand trembled as you signed decrees, your words echoed softer in the council chamber. The court began to prepare its next sun to orbit, already whispering of new alliances, new queens, new saviours. You smiled at them all, knowing how brief their names would burn. On your last evening you dismissed your attendants and walked alone through the palace halls. Your steps echoed against the mosaics, saints and emperors frozen in gold, staring down at you like witnesses to your secret trial. You stopped before one mosaic that depicted your younger self, the Empress in her glory, crowned and unbowed beside her emperor. The tiles shimmered in candlelight, but the eyes in the mosaic were not yours. They were gentler. They had not seen what you had done to keep that crown from falling. You touched the cold stone and whispered, "Tell them I was kind, if it makes them sleep easier." Then you returned to your chamber. The crown lay waiting on the table beside the mirror. You looked into the glass once more, and this time, the girl from the arena smiled back. Not with innocence, but understanding. You sat, steadying your breath. You knew that by morning the scribes would begin to write your ending, polishing every sin into scripture, every scar into sainthood. They would never know your last truth, that no woman in Byzantium truly survives. She only learns to rule her ruin, until even ruin bows. When the dawn broke over the city, it gilded the domes and towers in gold. The bells rang again. The Empress was gone, and the legend began. Tell me, if the only way to survive a world built to break you was to become the thing it feared most, would you do it?